Moving right along with the next segment, switching away from the AFC South just for a moment and talking some more about the Los Angeles Chargers. Some of the biggest takeaways that sources closer to the team have pointed out that maybe some of us fans or some of us just on the outside looking in have noticed but don't really know too many details about it. But overall, as just some context, we're exactly 21 days away, 3 weeks away from when the Los Angeles Chargers have to report to training camp on July 23rd, and their first practice will be the following day on July the 24th. There's already been a lot of changes, obviously. Jim Harbaugh coming in, establishing a new identity, a lot more of a tougher mindset, a lot more run heavy, building the passing game off of that. And I think it's a good thing for the Chargers, obviously, to do this with this team, because a lot is being said about how Harbaugh is already making these changes, but from what we see, we don't really see too much on the outside. You see it, you see the players that they're bringing in. Joe Alt, Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins. Some of these guys you already get an idea of that they want to run the ball. They want to establish that sort of intimidation factor with this team that Harbaugh is trying to bring in from his time in Michigan and how successful that was. And just how successful he was at the NFL level, obviously with the 49ers most recently. I think it's a great thing. It's a great match. But now we get to dive into a little bit more deeper things that I am very pleasantly surprised by, but also very, content with seeing that Harbaugh and just this team is embracing now. So one of the biggest points that has been mentioned so far through OTAs, mandatory minicamp, and things like that have been the big name players, the players that have made it over from this transition from Brandon Staley to Jim Harbaugh, being Justin Herbert, Khalil Mack, and Joey Bosa. All of the big name players, according to the sources, are really buying in to this new character, identity, and just attitude overall that Jim Harbaugh is trying to bring to the Los Angeles Chargers. Starting off with Justin Herbert. If you've heard Justin Herbert talk or if you've seen him, you know he's not really too much of a outgoing personality. He usually keeps the answers short when he's talking to the media. He says all the right things, all the politically correct things. Not too much, outside the box things that you'd expect from him. Everything he says is pretty much the typical quarterback answer. So it's not a bad thing. It's just who he is. That's what people have come to expect. But now he's talking for a lot longer. It was mentioned according to some of these sources. Usually it's very short, very brief with the media, but one of the media sessions that they had lasted about 30 minutes. Justin Herbert was cracking jokes, talking about going on stage with Zach Bryan over the course of this offseason. Just really, you could see it on his face how excited he was, how much looser he was in terms of just letting go a little bit more from a personality standpoint. So that was nice to see. And the same goes with Khalil Mack. Joking, smiling, talking for a lot longer. He even said it when he was walking away from the media in one of these media sessions, looking back to them and saying that that they got a lot more out of him, that he usually doesn't do that. But I think that just comes along with what Jim Harbaugh and the personality, the contagious personality that he brings, that I will, explain a little bit later on in this segment. But the last piece of the puzzle, the last piece of this big three that has survived this transition was Joey Bosa, and he wasn't too giddy, too happy about it, but he was more direct in his approach by saying that the clarity and the directness of Jim Harbaugh's ideas are a lot more, are exactly that, are a lot more clear and a lot more direct. And one thing that I thought was super interesting was that he mentioned how the message, the overall goal, and just main idea of what Jim Harbaugh is trying to establish isn't lost as it moves down the ladder, meaning that it isn't, lost in translation when you're getting the call from a defensive coordinator, your position coach. Everybody is giving the exact same message, and I think that's, it's remarkable that Jim Harbaugh has a staff like that, able to relay their message out to everybody the exact same way, but it's certainly going to help make this whole transition a lot less intimidating, and it's going to give more confidence to these players if they know exactly what they need to do, they know exactly what's expected of them, and they could just learn off of that by every single coach telling them the exact same thing to do. I thought that was super interesting, that I didn't know of right off the bat, but on that point, moving on to the next biggest takeaway that I saw, according to some of these sources, was that more on Justin Herbert embracing a little bit more of the spotlight. And I just finished talking about how Herbert, not the most, if you were to compare personalities, he isn't so much like a Patrick Mahomes, so much like a Josh Allen, or even a Lamar Jackson. The personalities are very different when you're talking all those quarterbacks compared to Justin Herbert in the past. But now it was sort of a funny point that was brought up because Herbert has been known to be a little bit more reserved, not liking too much to be the center of attention, feeling like everybody is looking at him. But that is exactly what Jim Harbaugh has almost made him do through this offseason period, OTAs, and mandatory minicamp, because like I'm sure most of you know, the quarterbacks have either red jerseys or a different colored jerseys than everybody else, just so everybody knows not to hit the quarterback, obviously, in practice. And Jim Harbaugh has made only Justin Herbert, out of all the quarterbacks, out of all the other players on the offensive side of the ball, he's the only one wearing a gold jersey. And obviously, you see how Justin Herbert wouldn't be too comfortable with it at the start, but it has been pointed out that he has embraced it a little bit more, just buying in fully to what Jim Harbaugh and his ideas were. That was a rule that Jim Harbaugh wanted to implement, so I like the fact that Herbert is just accepting it. He's loosening up, like I mentioned, a little bit more, and it's a bigger point because now he's in a bigger role with this team, and it might not seem like it because it might seem like they want to run the ball a lot more, but it is a lot more on him in a way because they did take away so many of his weapons. They did take away so much of this offensive firepower that when they do pass the ball, there's a lot more responsibility and almost higher stakes for Justin Herbert to make the right read, be on the same page as everybody, and relay the message clearly out there to everybody. So when they do pass the ball, it is efficient. It doesn't slow up this offense where it's stuttering every time you try to pass the ball, and now you're in a third and long, a second and long, really just stalling this offense. And I like how Herbert's embracing it. He is accepting this bigger role in a way and loosening up a little bit more. It's contagious just from Jim Harbaugh that I mentioned before. His personality, if you've ever seen Jim Harbaugh talk or just answer some questions from the media, you don't really know when he's being serious. It always seems like he doesn't take anything for granted. He always has a smile on his face. They always say, he always brings up that quote that him and his brother John Harbaugh always say, from their childhood, from their dad always saying it, who's got it better than us? Having that and almost implementing that into this team, keeping everything serious, but at the same time being very lighthearted about everything, keeping everything loose, not too much pressure on these players. He's really invigorating that into this offense and just this team in general, where the pressure is certainly on to be successful now after the Chargers haven't been for so long, but he's making it almost very light on these players' shoulders, and I really like that. As I get into the last point, talking some more about the rookies as the last biggest takeaway and how impactful they have been. Some of them have been so far through this offseason. You have Jim Harbaugh praising their first-round selection in Joe Alt, pretty much naming him a starter up until this point with how much he has praised him, how much he has been talking about how ready Joe Alt is and how open he is to being coached and everything. Just saying all the right things. Joe Alt doing all the right things to get on the coach's good side. He is obviously a great player, but now it seems like Jim Harbaugh is really buying into it, really liking what he's seeing. So if anybody had any doubts about Joe Alt starting, those are probably wiped away from what Jim Harbaugh said about Joe Alt. Then you get into Ladd McConkey, their second-round selection, and he has been described as the best route runner out there for the team, not just among the rookies, but the entire team on the offensive side of the ball. And Justin Herbert said, in his words, he's just picked up the offense so easily, it's like he's been a 4 or 5 year vet. That's what Justin Herbert said on how impressed he's been about Ladd McConkey and how, early on he's been very successful in this offense. And with Justin Herbert saying that, it goes right along the path of this team because Ladd McConkey right away should, dive right into being a prominent role in this offense because of the loss of Keenan Allen. Austin Eckler's not there. Mike Williams also moved on. You have Quentin Johnson, probably Ladd McConkey, and maybe Brendan Rice or somebody like that. Not too much depth at this position, and if Vlad McConkey can provide some sort of excitement, some sort of change of pace, he's definitely going to get in there. Big expectations to try and provide right away, but from what I've seen, from what I've heard, and how they describe him, it seems like everyone believes he can do it, so that's a great thing for them. And lastly, a name that not a lot of people have probably heard about, I certainly haven't heard about, is Tarheeb Still, a fifth-round defensive back out of Maryland. Probably the biggest surprise out of all this rookie class and how good he has performed, already playing with the first team defense, a lot of pass breakups, and he actually got an interception versus the first team offense in one of their practices as well. And his performances has drawn praise from probably the leader of that defense in Derwin James. He has, had some praise very much so for Tarheeb Still, and also their defensive coordinator Jesse Minter hasn't been shy about saying how impressed he has been with Still up until this point. The Chargers, really on all standpoints, could use as much help as they can, and the fact that they're getting major contributions, it seems already, from some of their young players, is only going to benefit them. They're not going to be in the playoff race per se. They're not going to be in contention really for a division title, or maybe they will if the Raiders aren't, that great. But, this is still a very much a work in progress. This is still in phase one of what the Chargers eventually want to look like, but it all seems to be going very well. It seems like everyone's embracing the change. Everyone's embracing just learning what Jim Harbaugh is saying. He's preaching the gospel, it seems like, for them, and they're all just absorbing it. I'm excited to see what they produce out there because it is so different, being very much run first compared to everybody else going pass heavy. So that dynamic, that difference in style should be something to watch in 2024. But that being said, we're going to shift over to the AFC South once again and talk about the Indianapolis Colts and their general manager, Chris Ballard, talking about why they didn't do too much in free agency, what was the reason behind that, and do I agree with it, and some realistic expectations we could foresee in the Indianapolis Colts in 2024. So that segment plus some more talking points on the Carolina Panthers and how they plan to execute their offense as well in this season. Both of those topics are coming up in just a few moments. Don't go anywhere.